Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
Leonard Michael Ackerman, James Robert Adams, Roy M. Alexander, John Gregg Arnold, Max Irwin Bear, Joseph Bailey Jr., Alan George Peretti, Jack Lamar Barker, France Mario Barron, Frank Pereiras III, George Duane Barrett, Ronald Kenneth Battle, Joseph Cruz Laza, Arthur James Beach, William Burden Beardsley, Theodore Belton, Michael D. Verne Bird, Dale Adams Blake, Isaac Bland, Robert Edward Brown, Charles William Brown Jr., Jimmy Fred Birchfield, John Martin Burke, Edward L. Bush, James Edward Butler, Gordon Leonard Cables, William Eugene Cannon, Dennis Richard Cantler, Richard James Carson, Joseph J. Cassidy Jr., John Jacobson Chubb, Charles Anthony Connell, Vaughn David Connell, Michael James Cordia, Bruce Alvin Couillard, Robert Gordon Cozart Jr., Carl Roger Crozier, Richard Perez Cruz, Dick E. Cuff, John Robert Cushman, Thomas Duane Darling, Dennis Thomas Darling, James Leonard Davis, David Lee Davis, Ricardo Gonzalez Davis, Raimundo F. de Herrera, Barry Ronald Delphin, John Willie Devine, William Edward Dillander, David Lawrence Drake Jr., John Francis Dugan, Douglas Glenn Edwards, Barry Lee Eichelberger, Ernest Franklin Elders, Alan Eugene Fellows, Dennis Dean Ferguson, Richard Lee Fife, Ronald Richard Fillmore, Theodore Lauer Fisher, James Elton Fisher, David Flores, Jeffrey Scott Forey, Mark Jeffrey Gardella, William Goodhart,
Greg Frederick Goodman, Marvin Foy Goodman, Jr., George Medford Guerrera, Jr., Willie Grant, Jr., Nick Jim Gressich, David Edward Gregory, Richard Anthony Groover, Irwin John Harwalt, Thomas Edward Haggard, Earl Newsom Hammond, L.G. George Hanna, Harold Ray Harris, Gary Clark Hatfield, Rufus Q. Henderson, Clifford Ray Heron, George Hitzelberger, Gary Lynn Hobbs, Arvell Bernard Holston, James Herbert Jeffries, Gregory Burt Johnson, Harold Benjamin Johnson, Max Arden Johnson, Freddie David Jones, Sr., George Albert Juarez, Michael Henry Julian, Victor Davison Calla, Jr., Ronald Dean Carew, John Michael Cares, Terry Taro Kawamura, Robert Lester Kessel, Michael Hayward Ketch, Thomas Edward Kingsley, Jack Webb Klein, Sr., Philip George Knepper, Jr., Larry Wayne Knox, Michael Edward Koschke, Frederick Carmen Cunha, James Peter Kurth, Cornelius Ethel Lau, Michael Lester Lawson, Bill Gregory Lee, Ronald Fred Leonard, Jack Rowley Licht, Jr., James William Laurie, Steve Lopez, Rudolph Daniel Lovato, Vernon Glenn Love, David Allen Maddox, Richard Lee Malone, Robert Phillips Martin, Jr., Vincent Carmen Moreau, Jr., William Hayes Moth, Richard Ray Maynard, Michael P. McCormick, Charles Albert McDaniels, Rick E. McFarlane, Tommy Lewis McFarlane, Michael Joseph McGuire, Francis Michael McGuire, Clifford Abdul McKinnon, Kenneth D. Moore, Dennis Richard Morrell, Dennis Leroy Morrill, Gregory Frederick Mossford,
Donald Lee Neely, Oscar Franklin Neiswander, James Robert Novetny, John Gardner Osterhaus, Wince Isaac Overton, Jr., Benny Joe Paolantonio, James Allen Patton, Raul Victor Perez, John Darrell Peddle, Roger Lee Phillips, Gerald Lee Penneker, Nigel Frederick Pose, James Clayton Reed, Gary Dwayne Reed, David William Roberts, Alan Richard Roberts, Jose Anton Robles Miranda, George Bacon Ross, Jr., William Earl Royal, Marion Nelson Saltz, David James Sandvig, Franklin A. Sappingfield, Frank DePaul Saraceno, Jr., John Henry Savageau, Leslie Berkeley Sayer, Gerald Bernard Schmidt, James Daniel Schooley, James Edward Schuneman, Philemon Serrano, Eugene Small, Larry Dean Smith, Dennis Allen Smith, Clarence Elvin Smith, Hubert Ray Smith, Oswald Clayton South, Jr., Franklin Elliott Spite, Gary Ross Stacy, Carl Joseph Taschek, Jr., Robert Arnold Tate, Jr., Oris Camillus Taylor, Robert Noel Thompson, Robert Eugene Thompson, Willie Sandford Tillman, John Leroy Truesdell, John Richard Turner, Abelardo Vera, John Anthony Vergalito, Tommy Andrew Walden, John Raymond Walker, Willie Terry Walker, Jr., Lossie Ray Wangler, William Joseph Weidinger, Tinsley Jack Wells, Jr., Odell Jack Werner, John Edward White, Larry Michael Whitus, Richard James Widmer, Michael David Woodard, Louis Claude Zucker,